The stars were calm that day, silent, distant, and endless. The hospital ship Mercy Dawn moved slowly through the black ocean of space, its bright white hull glowing softly against the darkness. From far away, it looked like a drifting lantern, a small symbol of peace in a universe torn apart by war. Inside the ship, life was busy but peaceful. The smell of medicine mixed with recycled air. Machines beeped softly in the medical bays and voices echoed through the corridors, calm, kind, and tired. The Mercy Dawn was not a warship. It had no weapons, no armor meant for battle. It carried doctors, nurses, and volunteers, people who believed that even in war humanity should still have a heart. They had come from many corners of Earth and its colonies. Some were from large cities, others had grown up on small farming moons, but all of them shared the same purpose: to save lives, no matter which side those lives came from. The Mercy Dawn treated everyone who needed help. They followed a simple rule: the injured were not the enemy. For weeks, the ship had been traveling along the edge of the Helion sector, picking up wounded soldiers from various battlefields. The crew worked without rest. The wards were full of people, men and women who had been caught in crossfire, their bodies broken but their hearts still clinging to hope. In the main med bay, one of the senior doctors walked between the rows of patients, checking monitors and comforting whoever was awake. He moved carefully, speaking in a soft tone, telling stories about Earth and about blue skies, oceans, and music. The patients listened quietly. Some smiled, some wept. Even in space, the thought of home still mattered. Near the observation deck, a group of young nurses looked out the window during their short break. They could see the stars spread across the black canvas. One of them whispered how peaceful it looked, how impossible it seemed that just beyond that beauty, entire fleets were fighting and dying. The communications officer sat in front of her console watching the radar screens. A faint signal appeared now and then. Background noise, most likely. She adjusted her headset, thinking it was just interference from nearby asteroid fields, but something about the pattern bothered her. She saved the readings anyway, planning to report them later. In the command deck, the captain of the Mercy Dawn stood in front of the large viewing glass. His face was calm but serious. He had seen enough war to know peace never lasted long. He placed his hand on the console, feeling the soft vibration of the ship's engines. "Keep our course steady," he said quietly. "Let's get these people home." Hours passed. The crew returned to their routines: healing, cleaning, recording data, sending medical reports to the Earth Council. The ship glided through space like a ghost, silent except for the hum of machines. Then, something changed. It began with a small flicker on the radar, a dot that shouldn't have been there. The communications officer frowned and checked again. The signal was faint but moving fast. "Probably debris," she muttered, but her heart didn't believe it. She opened a channel to the captain. "Sir, I'm picking up an unknown contact at 317 Mark II, she said. The captain stepped closer. "Can you identify it?" "Negative. No transponder, no communication signal. It's just there." "Could be a sensor glitch," said one of the bridge crew, but another officer leaned over and shook his head. "It's changing direction. It's following us." The captain's calm expression faded. "Keep monitoring. No sudden moves. We're a hospital ship. They'll recognize that." The Mercy Dawn's hull displayed a massive white cross with blue lights pulsing around it. The universal mark of neutrality. Everyone in space knew what that meant. No attack, no interference, no harm. But the contact didn't turn away. In fact, it was getting closer. By the next hour, more dots appeared on the radar. Not one, but 3, then 5. The bridge grew quiet. Every officer stared at the screen as the dots formed a formation, the unmistakable shape of warships. The captain gave a quiet order. "Broadcast our identification, now." The communications officer pressed the transmit button. "This is the Mercy Dawn, a registered humanitarian vessel under Earth's medical code 07A. We are unarmed and on a medical mission. Please confirm recognition." Her voice echoed across the silent deck. No reply came. Only static. She tried again. "Unidentified ships, this is a hospital vessel. Please respond." Still nothing. The captain's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. "Keep transmitting. They'll hear us." Outside, the stars continued to shine, cold, indifferent, and distant. Then the lights on the deck flickered. The radar alarm began to beep rapidly. "Incoming signals," shouted the navigation officer. "They've locked onto us." Before anyone could react, a bright flash filled the observation windows. The ship shook violently. People screamed as they fell to the floor. Another explosion followed, tearing through the cargo hold. Medical supplies burst into flames. The soft hum of peace was replaced by the roar of chaos. Damage control. "All decks report," the captain shouted. Fire alarms blared. The once calm corridors filled with smoke and shouts. Doctors and nurses who had been tending to patients now ran to move the wounded to safety. The hull creaked as it took another hit. The ship's lights flickered red. In the medbay, one nurse tried to shield her patients as sparks rained from the ceiling. She pressed a bandage against one man's wound, whispering, "Hold on, please. Just hold on." Her voice shook, but she refused to leave. The communications officer cried out, "They're targeting the medical wards." Her voice cracked. "They're hitting the hospital sections." The captain could hardly believe it. No, they wouldn't. Not a hospital ship. But the next blast proved him wrong. The Mercy Dawn shuddered again, its white lights now flickering dimly like a dying candle. Power systems failed one by one. The ship began to drift. Through the smoke and noise, the communications officer kept trying to send a message. To any nearby ships.
"We are under attack!"
"Repeat, the Mercy Dawn is under attack. We are unarmed. Requesting immediate assistance." Her words vanished into static. The attackers didn't respond, and they just kept firing. The captain's voice grew hoarse. "Shut down all power except life support. Maybe they'll stop if we look dead." But the enemy ships didn't stop. They circled like predators. One missile after another hit the wounded vessel. The hull cracked, oxygen vented into space, and the once bright hospital ship began to break apart. In the chaos, some escape pods launched. Others were destroyed before they could even separate. The people inside could only stare at the burning remains of their ship, the ship that had once stood for mercy. As the explosions faded, the Mercy Dawn floated silently in space, broken and bleeding light. Its white cross was scorched black. The stars around it reflected off shattered glass and drifting medical tools, bandages, vials, and pieces of uniforms. For a long moment, there was no sound. Just the soft static of the last transmission still looping endlessly. "This is the Mercy Dawn. We are a hospital ship. We need help." Then the signal went silent. The attackers disappeared into the dark, leaving behind only wreckage and silence. Later, in distant sectors, merchant ships would find fragments of the Mercy Dawn, burnt hull pieces, broken data cores, and a single medical bracelet floating among the debris. The bracelet had one word engraved: hope. No one could understand why it happened. The rules of war had been broken in the coldest, cruelest way. It wasn't just an attack on a ship. It was an attack on what humanity stood for. Far away, on Earth, no one yet knew what had occurred. The stars still looked calm from the blue planet's surface. But soon the truth would reach home, and when it did, the peace that remained in humanity's heart would begin to fade. Because on that day, in the darkness of the Helion sector, the light of mercy went out, and something far more powerful and far more dangerous began to awaken. The smoke had long faded, but silence still surrounded the empty stretch of space where the hospital ship Mercy Dawn had once drifted. Now there was only floating debris, small glowing fragments that shimmered under the light of distant suns. The pieces of white hull marked with the symbol of a blue cross spun slowly among the stars like broken memories. Hours turned into days before anyone found the wreck. A cargo freighter passing through the Helion route picked up the distress signal, faint, broken, and repeating the same words again and again. The message was barely clear. "This is the Mercy Dawn. Under attack. Need help?" The freighter's captain ordered his crew to change course immediately. When they arrived at the coordinates, all they saw were twisted remains. They moved carefully among the debris, scanning for life signs. It was hard to believe that something meant for healing could be destroyed so completely. Then one of the crew members shouted, "Sir! I've got movement. There's life out there." They opened the outer doors and pulled in a damaged escape pod. Inside were two people, weak but breathing. Their suits were torn, their faces pale and burned. The medics rushed them to the small infirmary on board. The survivors didn't speak for hours. When they finally did, their words came slowly, trembling and filled with disbelief. "They knew who we were," one of them whispered. They saw our mark. We were begging them to stop. The freighter's captain listened quietly. He had seen the worst sides of war: smuggling, piracy, betrayal. But even he couldn't imagine attacking a hospital ship. It went against everything written, everything agreed upon by all civilizations. He recorded their testimony and sent it directly to Earth. Then he looked out of his ship's window at the scattered remains still floating nearby. "Who could do this?" he murmured. Back on Earth, the message took 3 days to reach the Communication Council. At first, no one believed it. A few officers thought it was some kind of error, a wrong signal, an old recording from a past battle. But when the report was confirmed by multiple space probes, the truth became impossible to ignore. The news broke across every screen, every colony, every settlement under human space. Footage of the Mercy Dawn's wreckage played again and again. Pieces of the ship, the broken medical logo, and a single floating stretcher spinning slowly in the void. The voices of the survivors were broadcast too, their shaky words cutting through static and disbelief. Within hours, the world changed. Crowds gathered outside the Earth Council headquarters, holding signs and candles. Many cried openly while others shouted for justice. People across the colonies sent messages filled with anger and heartbreak. The Mercy Dawn had been a symbol of peace. It helped soldiers, civilians, even alien wounded from both sides of the war. To attack it was not just a crime. It was a betrayal of humanity itself. News anchors spoke in heavy voices. The Mercy Dawn carried no weapons. It was clearly marked as a hospital vessel, yet it was destroyed in cold space. This is more than an act of war. It's an attack on mercy. In the quiet chambers of the Earth Council, leaders gathered around a long, oval table. The atmosphere was tense, the air heavy with shock and fury. Some members argued for caution. "We must confirm who did this before we act," one said. Others slammed their fists on the table. "There's nothing to confirm." The signal came from the Zarkon Dominion's border. The room fell silent. The Zarkon Dominion, humanity's uneasy neighbor in the stars, had always been aggressive but never reckless enough to strike a neutral vessel. The idea that they would destroy a hospital ship seemed too monstrous to be true. Still, the data didn't lie. The attack had come from Zarkon coordinates. No other fleet had been nearby. A representative from the outer colonies stood up. His voice shook, but not from fear. "If we don't act now," he said, "then mercy means nothing. They killed doctors. They killed patients. They killed our trust. We can't stay silent." The vote was quick, almost instinctive. The Earth Council agreed to launch a full investigation and prepare for possible retaliation. Behind closed doors, military leaders began assembling reports. Meanwhile, ordinary people turned their grief into movement. Families of the victims held vigils, lighting candles shaped like stars. Children drew pictures of the Mercy Dawn with words like "Hope and Forgive" written underneath. Artists painted murals on colony walls. A glowing white ship surrounded by hands reaching out to save it. But as days passed, sorrow slowly changed into anger. A viral message spread through the networks, a simple sentence written by an unknown survivor. "If mercy can be killed, what else is left?" That question burned across every communication line. People began demanding action. Soldiers who had retired from duty returned to recruitment centers. Engineers volunteered to repair old warships. Even those who had once protested against fighting now said quietly, "This time it's different." In the middle of all this, a small team of survivors was brought to Earth for medical treatment. When they arrived, news reporters waited outside the hospital gates. One of them, still weak and pale, spoke to the cameras. His voice was calm but filled with grief. "They fired on us even after we told them we were unarmed," he said. "We showed them our symbols, our lights, and they didn't care. They kept shooting until there was nothing left." His words became the spark that lit the fuse. Across the military command centers, activity surged. Commanders who had once avoided war meetings now stayed awake for days. Old ships were reactivated from deep storage, their engines tested and shields upgraded. Every major shipyard on Earth began to glow with life again as mechanics, pilots, and technicians worked side by side. The people called it Operation Dawn's Justice. But behind the political speeches and headlines, the pain remained deeply personal. Families of the doctors and nurses who had served on the Mercy Dawn gathered in memorial halls. They sat together, holding each other's hands, staring at holographic images of their loved ones smiling before the mission. Some whispered prayers. Others just sat in silence. One mother said softly to a news camera, "My daughter believed she could save lives even in war. She said humanity needed people who heal, not harm. And now she's gone. I want peace, but I also want those who did this to answer." Her words were replayed millions of times. In the military academies, recruits were shown footage of the Mercy Dawn before training began. Commanders told them, "Remember this image. This is why you fight, not for hate, but for what they took from us." Everywhere emotions ran deep. The human spirit, wounded and angry, began to shift. Far away, deep in the Helion sector, automated probes continued to scan the wreck site. One of them captured a faint signal, a small beacon that had survived the explosion. When the data reached Earth, analysts discovered it contained the last transmission from the ship's main deck. It was the voice of the Mercy Dawn's captain. His final words were calm, almost whispering through static. "If anyone hears this, tell them we stayed true to our oath. We helped until the end. Don't let our light be forgotten." When this recording was played before the council, the room went completely silent. Some officials wiped their eyes. Others stared down at the table, unable to speak. The next day, the Earth Council made a public declaration. It was broadcast on every channel, every colony, every outpost. The speaker's voice was firm but filled with emotion. Humanity has always believed in mercy, even in war. But what happened to the Mercy Dawn cannot be ignored. We will find those responsible. We will bring them to justice. And we will remind the stars that even kindness has a line that must never be crossed. The crowd erupted in cheers, tears, and chants of unity. That same night, the skies above Earth shimmered as the first wave of fleet mobilizations began. Massive warships rose from their docks, engines glowing like fireflies in the dark. Reporters described it as a storm gathering behind a calm horizon. In one corner of the command deck, a senior officer looked out the window at the departing ships. "We tried peace," he said quietly to his aide. "Now the stars will know our pain." Far beyond, the wreck of the Mercy Dawn still floated, its remains silent and cold. But in the hearts of billions, its story was alive, a story of compassion destroyed, and justice soon to rise. What began as a quiet mission of healing had now turned into a call that echoed across every human world. Never again. And as the engines of Earth's fleets roared to life, the universe itself seemed to tremble, for it had seen what happens when mercy is betrayed. News of the Mercy Dawn spread like fire through every corner of human space. For days, the story played on every screen. The wreckage, the survivors, the last message from the captain. People couldn't stop watching. They couldn't stop talking about it either. In cafes, schools, and mining colonies, everyone asked the same question. How could anyone attack a hospital ship? The shock was so deep that even children asked their parents why kindness had been punished. There were no easy answers. On Earth, silence hung over cities at night. People stood outside looking up at the stars, knowing somewhere out there were those responsible, and wondering what would happen next. Inside the Earth Council headquarters, meetings continued day and night. The chambers were filled with tired faces, their eyes red from lack of sleep. They had received more than 10,000 messages from the public in a single day. Some were letters from grieving families, others were demands for justice. One message simply said, "If mercy can die, then what are we?" The council's main hall was tense. The large holographic image of the Mercy Dawn floated in the center, its hull cracked, its cross half burned. No one spoke for a long moment. The silence felt like a wound. Finally, the Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Fleet broke the stillness. "We can't undo what happened," he said quietly, "but we can make sure it never happens again." His words carried weight. The council members exchanged glances. They knew what he meant, and they also knew that once they chose that path, there would be no turning back. The investigation teams confirmed what many already feared. The attack had come from ships belonging to the Zarkon Dominion. The data was clear: weapon signatures, energy trails, communication frequencies. Everything pointed in one direction. When this confirmation reached the public, the sorrow turned into something else. The people's grief hardened into resolve. Billions of humans across multiple planets began to stand together in one shared emotion, not hate but determination. They wanted justice. They wanted safety. They wanted to protect what was left of humanity's compassion. Within a week, the Earth Council made its decision. A message was broadcast across all human colonies. The attack on the hospital vessel Mercy Dawn was an act against humanity itself. In response, Earth will unite its fleets under one command to ensure that such cruelty can never happen again. This is not a war of revenge, it is a stand for peace. A stand for the right to exist with dignity. The people listened in silence, then applauded. Across spaceports and military bases, the sound of engines filled the air. Old warships that had been resting in dry dock for years were reactivated. Their dark hulls began to glow again under the light of new reactors. Engineers worked day and night, their faces covered in sweat and oil. Pilots trained without rest. Some of these people had never fought before. Others had sworn they would never fight again. But this time felt different. It wasn't about conquest. It wasn't about politics. It was about defending something sacred, the idea that even in war, humanity should have a heart. The fleet began to gather in Earth's orbit. From the ground, people could see them, lines of lights crossing the sky like moving stars. Reporters described the sight as a second sunrise. In every home, families watched the live broadcasts. Children pointed at the glowing ships and asked their parents where they were going. The parents didn't always answer, but deep down they knew. Humanity was preparing to strike back. In the shipyards, thousands of workers gathered before the launch of the first wave. One of the oldest engineers stood up on a crate and shouted, "Remember what they did to our healers. This fleet is not for wartime, it's for them." The workers cheered and began chanting the name Mercy Dawn. It became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of unity. The Earth Council renamed the operation the Dawn Response. From the moon to Mars, from mining colonies to deep space stations, people contributed however they could. Some donated resources. Some sent messages of support to the fleet crews. Some simply prayed. As the fleet grew, it became the largest in human history. Thousands of ships of all sizes gathered in formation. Carriers, cruisers, transports, and supply vessels. Together, they created a wall of metal and light so massive that astronomers joked it was a new constellation. The press called it the fleet that darkened the stars. But behind the excitement, there was still pain. Every ship carried memories of those lost. Every pilot had seen the faces of the victims in the news. Every soldier carried a silent promise: never again. The fleet's main command ship was enormous, floating above the moon's surface like a silent guardian. Its hull reflected the earth below, and along one side, engraved in silver letters, were the words, "For the Mercy Dawn." Before departure, a quiet ceremony was held. No speeches, no music, just a moment of silence broadcast across all colonies. People everywhere stopped what they were doing and bowed their heads. For one full minute, the entire human civilization stood still. Then the engines began to ignite. One by one, the ships lifted into formation. The light from their thrusters painted the sky in shades of gold and blue. From the surface, it looked as if 1,000 comets were leaving Earth at once. The airwaves filled with messages from families sending love and prayers to their loved ones aboard. "Come back safe," many said. "Do this for them." In space, the fleet moved like a single living being. The sound of the engines was silent in the vacuum, but inside every ship, hearts were pounding. Many of the crew were not trained soldiers. They were volunteers, engineers, and scientists who couldn't forget the images of the hospital ship's destruction. They worked quietly at their stations, each one determined to honor the lives lost. Meanwhile, on Earth, factories switched from civilian production to military support. Shipyards worked without stopping. Even farmers on distant colonies sent food supplies for the crews. Everyone wanted to help in some way. Humanity had become one heartbeat, pulsing together in shared grief and determination. In the halls of communication, analysts monitored every signal coming from Zarkon space. The Zarkon Dominion remained silent. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Their silence spoke louder than any word. That silence only deepened humanity's resolve. The Earth Council's spokesperson appeared once again on every broadcast. "We do not seek destruction," he said. "We seek understanding and safety. But if our mercy is seen as weakness, then we will show the strength that mercy can hold." The speech was short but powerful. The next day, the fleet began its long journey toward the Helian border. In deep space, the ships moved through the dark like a river of light. The stars reflected off their metallic hulls, and from a distance it looked like an entire constellation was in motion. The fleet was calm, organized, and determined. Every pilot, every crew member knowing why they were there. Inside one of the ships, a young communications officer sat quietly, staring out the observation window. She remembered the images of the Mercy Dawn, the white hull torn apart, the final message fading into static. She whispered softly, "We're coming. You won't be forgotten." Her words were not just hers. They belonged to everyone in the fleet. As the days passed, the fleet's progress was tracked by millions back on Earth. News networks showed live updates, maps, and visual feeds. People sent thousands of messages to the crews filled with encouragement and love. The entire human civilization watched, waiting, hoping that this mission would bring peace or at least meaning to what had been lost. In one of the main control rooms, a technician looked up at the stars ahead. "It's strange," he said quietly. "Out here, the stars look so calm. You'd never think they're about to witness something that could change everything." The officer beside him nodded. "Calm before the storm," he said softly. By the time the fleet reached the outer rim of the Helian sector, the stars around them seemed dimmer, as if even the light feared what was coming. Back on Earth, millions gathered again in the streets, looking up at the night sky, whispering prayers. Parents held their children close. Old veterans stared in silence. They all knew the truth. Something irreversible had begun. The Mercy Dawn had once been a symbol of hope and healing. Now its memory had awakened something deep in humanity's heart, not just anger, but unity, courage, and a fierce desire to protect what made them human. And as the fleet approached the dark frontier, the universe seemed to hold its breath, because for the first time in history, all of Earth's forces stood together, not for power, not for control, but for the memory of those who believed that kindness could survive even in war. The fleet drifted through the deep void, thousands of ships moving together like a single heartbeat. Their engines glowed softly, creating a ribbon of blue light that stretched for miles. From a distance, it looked like a new constellation born in motion, a constellation made of human will. The people back on Earth watched every step of the journey. News screens in cities and colonies showed live feeds of the fleet, and across every home people whispered prayers. No one knew what would happen when the ships reached the border of Zarkon space, but everyone knew why they were going. The Mercy Dawn still lived in their hearts, her light, her silence, her message. Inside the flagship, the main command deck was quiet except for the steady hum of machines. Officers monitored the radar screens carefully, their eyes sharp but calm. The fleet had entered the Helian frontier, the same place where the Mercy Dawn had vanished. Every coordinate, every piece of data had been checked 100 times. The space ahead looked empty, but everyone could feel the tension rising. One officer looked at the stars through the viewing glass. "It feels different here," he said softly, as if even the light remembers. The commander standing beside him nodded without looking away. This is where it began. This is where it changes. Far behind them, support ships carried supplies, fuel, and thousands of crew members who worked tirelessly. Doctors, technicians, and engineers kept everything running. They were not warriors by nature, but they had become part of something larger, a promise that mercy would not die in silence. In the middle of the fleet, a small vessel served as a mobile memorial. It carried the personal items recovered from the Mercy Dawn, a few medical kits, a cracked communicator, a bracelet with the word hope engraved on it. Every day, a recording played softly inside that ship, the final message from the captain of the Mercy Dawn. We stayed true to our oath. We helped until the end. The crew listened to it often, and each time their resolve deepened. After weeks of travel, the fleet reached the outer rim of Zarkon-controlled territory. The stars seemed dimmer there, as if the darkness was thicker. Long-range sensors detected patrol routes, defense grids, and energy signatures. The command deck filled with quiet voices as officers began exchanging data. "Multiple stations ahead," one said. "Possible communication hubs and patrol points." "Any response from their side?" asked the commander. "None," replied another. "They know we're here, but they're silent." That silence was unsettling. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of calculation. The commander knew it. The enemy was watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Back on Earth, the Council sent one last transmission to the fleet. It was short, simple, and powerful. You are the voice of the fallen. Speak wisely, act bravely, and remember why we sent you. The fleet acknowledged the message. Then they continued forward. When they reached the first Zarkon outpost, the atmosphere turned heavy. The outpost was large, built into a fragment of an old asteroid, with docking bays and towers glowing faint red. Human intelligence had confirmed it was a major relay station for military communication. The commander ordered the communication team to open all channels. "This is the human fleet," the officer's voice echoed across the stars. "We come seeking the truth about the destruction of our hospital ship, the Mercy Dawn. We demand those responsible be identified and brought forward." The message was repeated in multiple languages, translated automatically by the fleet's systems. Then they waited. Minutes passed. The radar screens remained still. No answer came. The crew looked at one another. They had hoped even now for some kind of explanation, a message, an apology, anything. But the silence continued, as cold as the stars around them. Finally, the commander gave a quiet order. "Send the warning again." The second broadcast went out. "We ask again, confirm your acknowledgement. If you stay silent, you accept responsibility." Another long pause followed. Then finally a signal appeared, faint and broken. The communication officer adjusted the frequencies until a voice came through, rough and static-filled. "This is Zarkon Command. You are trespassing in restricted space. Turn back." The human officer leaned forward. "You attacked our hospital ship. You violated the sacred laws of mercy. We want answers, not warnings." The voice on the other end paused. Then came a response, cold and distant. "No such event occurred. You are mistaken, that was it. No apology, no regret, just denial." On the command deck, anger rippled quietly through the crew. Some clenched their fists. Others looked down, unable to believe what they'd heard. The commander took a slow breath. "We have their answer," he said. "Now we decide what it means." The Council back on Earth had given the fleet authority to act if necessary, but only if every chance for dialogue failed. Now that moment had come. For the next few hours, the fleet remained in silent formation, hovering like a wall of light against the darkness. Then, as the order spread, engines began to roar softly. The ships started to move into position, not as aggressors, but as enforcers of a promise. The human fleet launched a precision operation. Their goal was clear: disable military stations, cut communication lines, and force the Zarkon Dominion to face what it had done. Every action was calculated to avoid harming civilians. Humanity was angry, but it still refused to lose its soul. From orbit, the sight was breathtaking. Thousands of glowing ships moving in perfect coordination, their engines lighting up the dark like a rising storm. Observers across the colonies called it the night the stars moved. Zarkon ships scrambled in response. Warning lights flashed across their systems as they realized the scale of the fleet approaching. Even they hadn't expected such unity. Earth's colonies had always been divided, but now they moved as one. The first phase of the operation began. Drones flew ahead to disable enemy radar systems. Communications were jammed. Instead of launching destructive weapons, the fleet used electromagnetic bursts to shut down power grids. Lights across Zarkon stations flickered and went dark. The commander's voice echoed through the fleet's channels. "Remember who we are. We're not here to destroy. We're here to make them see." The operation continued for hours. Ships moved in silent precision, cutting through space like streams of light. Every maneuver was carefully planned, a message written in motion. Humanity's fleet didn't come to burn, but to remind the stars that mercy still had power. Then something unexpected happened. A small transmission broke through the interference. It was from one of the Zarkon defense officers. His voice trembled. "We didn't order the attack," he said. "It was a mistake. A rogue command." The human communications team exchanged looks. The message repeated twice before the line went dead. The commander leaned over the console. "Trace that signal," he ordered. But before they could locate it, several of the Zarkon ships began to withdraw. Some lowered their weapons and transmitted surrender codes. Others powered down completely. It was clear that even within the Dominion, not everyone had agreed with what had been done. For the first time since the Mercy Dawn was lost, the humans saw hesitation in their enemies. Not pride, not arrogance, but guilt. The commander looked at the fading red lights of the retreating ships. He said softly, "Maybe now they understand." Back on Earth, when news of the fleet's success reached home, there was no celebration, only quiet relief. People didn't cheer. They just breathed a little easier. They had wanted justice, but what they really wanted was peace. In cities across the colonies, people lit candles for those lost on both sides. A mother who had lost her son aboard the Mercy Dawn said to a reporter, "I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted the stars to know his life mattered." Those words spread faster than any headline. They reminded everyone why this had begun, not for vengeance, but for dignity. In the weeks that followed, the human fleet remained near the border, maintaining order but avoiding unnecessary confrontation. They had proven their strength without losing their humanity. The Zarkon Dominion finally sent a formal message, asking for negotiation and investigation into the attack. The Council agreed. Humanity had made its point. The fleet, once called the fleet that darkened the stars, had done its duty, not by burning the sky, but by reminding the universe that even after the deepest wound, compassion could still lead the way. As the ship slowly turned back toward Earth, the crew looked out at the stars, quiet and thoughtful. They had carried anger into the void and returned with understanding. They had fought not to destroy, but to defend the heart of what made them human. And somewhere, in that endless ocean of darkness, the broken pieces of the Mercy Dawn still drifted. But now, they were surrounded by peace, not silence. Her mission was complete, in a way she could never have imagined. The human fleet returned to the border of Earth's space, moving slower than before. Their engines burned softly, casting a pale blue light across the dark void. There was no cheering, no celebration. Inside the ships, people sat quietly, feeling both proud and tired. They had gone to seek justice, and now they carried something deeper, a truth that felt heavier than any weapon. Messages from home flooded their communication screens. Families sent words of love, children sent drawings, and leaders sent their gratitude. The whole of Earth watched the fleet with a mix of pride and sadness. Everyone knew this journey had changed humanity forever. But even as the fleet slowed, the mystery of what had really happened to the Mercy Dawn remained. The Zarkon Dominion had sent a message asking for peace talks and promising to reveal the full truth. The fleet commander agreed to hold a meeting in neutral space, far from any planet, in a region known simply as the Quiet Zone. It was a vast, silent part of the galaxy, with no suns, no colonies, and no warships nearby. Only the whispers of drifting dust and the soft glow of distant stars. The fleet arrived first, setting up a large communication hub. Drones floated outside the ships, forming a protective circle, while inside the flagship, technicians worked to prepare a secure link. The crew could feel the tension again, but this time it wasn't fear of battle. It was the nervousness of waiting for answers they weren't sure they wanted to hear. Hours later, the Zarkon delegation appeared. Their ships were dark and angular, moving slowly, showing no weapons. From the outside, they looked cold and distant, but inside, they too were full of people who had lost something to this endless conflict. When the communication screen lit up, both sides stared at one another through the glowing glass. The human commander spoke first. His voice was calm but firm. "We came for the truth," he said. "Not revenge. Tell us why your fleet attacked a hospital ship. Tell us what really happened." The Zarkon leader, a tall figure with tired eyes, remained silent for a long moment. Then in a low voice he said, "It was never meant to happen. The attack on your ship was a mistake, a terrible one." The human crew leaned closer, listening. The Zarkon continued, "Our communication systems were compromised months before the incident. False orders were sent to one of our patrol fleets, claiming that the Mercy Dawn was carrying weapons, not medicine. They believed they were stopping a supply convoy." The room on the human flagship fell silent. The commander asked, "You're saying someone tricked your fleet into attacking a hospital ship?" "Yes," the Zarkon leader said. "And not just us. The same false orders were sent to several stations. We traced the origin of those messages. They didn't come from Earth or from us." The humans exchanged worried looks. The commander frowned. "Then who?" The Zarkon leader hesitated before answering. "A group outside both our territories. They call themselves the Neutral Accord, a network of traders, mercenaries, and data brokers. They profit from conflict. They wanted to spark a war between us to raise the price of peace." For a moment, no one spoke. It sounded impossible, and yet it made sense. Too many things about the attack had felt wrong, too precise, too sudden. The human communications officer whispered, "So, both sides were used." The Zarkon leader nodded slowly. "Yes, and before we could uncover the truth, your fleet was already on its way. We couldn't reach you without risking open war." The commander closed his eyes briefly, trying to process it all. Thousands of lives lost because someone wanted to sell chaos. The Zarkon replied softly, "On our side, too." That moment changed everything. The tension in the room eased, replaced by something quieter: sorrow. Two sides that had hated each other for generations suddenly realized they were both victims of the same lie. The human commander leaned forward. "If this is true, we can prove it. Share your data with us. Let's uncover who did this." The Zarkon agreed. "We already prepared the files." Within minutes, streams of encrypted data flowed between the ships. Engineers and analysts worked side by side, translating codes, cross-checking transmissions, and piecing together the trail of deception. Slowly, the picture became clear: a web of false orders, hidden frequencies, and manipulated signals. The Neutral Accord had planted them months earlier, using technology designed to imitate official commands. The truth was undeniable. When the final file loaded, a quiet sigh spread across the human command deck. They had found the proof they needed. The commander looked up at the screen. "Then let's finish this, together." Both sides agreed to form a joint task force to hunt down those responsible. For the first time in living memory, humans and Zarkons shared a common goal. It felt strange but right. Days turned into weeks as they worked together, tracking signals, uncovering hidden bases, and following trails through empty space. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew that something had changed between them. They were no longer enemies. During one of the long nights on the flagship, a young technician looked out at the stars and said quietly, "Maybe this is what the Mercy Dawn was meant to do. Not just heal bodies, but hearts." The commander heard her and smiled faintly. "Maybe it took her loss to remind us what we were meant to be." News of the Alliance spread quickly across both civilizations. People on Earth were shocked at first. The idea of working with their old enemies felt impossible. But when the evidence of the deception was released publicly, anger turned to understanding. People realized that the war they had feared was born not from hate, but from greed and lies. Families of those lost on the Mercy Dawn watched the reports with tears in their eyes. It didn't bring their loved ones back, but it brought meaning to their loss. For the first time, there was hope that this tragedy could prevent others. The Joint Task Force finally located the heart of the Neutral Accord, a hidden base deep in a system filled with radiation clouds. The humans and Zarkons didn't attack it with fire. Instead, they surrounded it, cutting off all escape routes. When the group realized they had been discovered, they sent a message offering to sell information in exchange for freedom. Both sides refused. The base was dismantled peacefully. The data recovered from it contained years of manipulation, proof that many small conflicts across the galaxy had been fueled the same way. With this evidence, the alliance between Earth and Zarkon grew stronger. But even with justice served, the memory of the Mercy Dawn stayed alive. Months later, the human fleet returned home. When they entered Earth's orbit, people filled the streets and rooftops looking up at the glowing line of ships crossing the night sky. The silence of that moment felt sacred. In the capital, a monument was unveiled, a white structure shaped like the outline of a ship, surrounded by a ring of light. Inside, the names of everyone aboard the Mercy Dawn were engraved in silver. People came from every colony to see it. Some cried quietly. Others just stood, heads bowed, remembering. The commander gave a short speech. His voice was steady, but his eyes showed emotion. "We went to seek revenge," he said, "but we found something better, understanding. The ones who fell taught us that mercy is not weakness. It's the strength that keeps humanity human." His words were broadcast across planets and colonies. Even in Zarkon space, they were played in schools and homes. The galaxy had changed, not through power, but through truth. After the ceremony, as the lights dimmed and people began to leave, the commander stayed behind for a moment. He looked at the names on the wall, tracing one of them with his hand. "You did it," he whispered. "You reminded us who we are." Outside, children played near the monument. One of them pointed at the night sky and asked, "Will the stars ever fight again?" An old man nearby smiled gently. Not if we remember what happened here. The fleet that had once been called the fleet that darkened the stars was now known by a new name. The Fleet of Light. It symbolized hope, unity, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, humanity could still find its way back to compassion. Back in the quiet zone, the empty region where the truth had first been revealed, the wreckage of the Mercy Dawn was still drifting slowly. The Alliance decided not to recover it. Instead, they surrounded it with gentle beacons of light, a permanent memorial that would shine for anyone traveling through that silent part of the galaxy. Ships passing by would slow down and send a short signal of respect. Some whispered words, some offered silent prayers, and every time the beacons flickered, it was as if the Mercy Dawn herself was answering, reminding them all that mercy, once shown, never truly dies. Months had passed since the truth about the Mercy Dawn came to light. The galaxy had changed in ways few had imagined possible. Where once there had been tension, there was now cautious peace. The war that almost began had ended before it could truly start, and in its place something new had begun to grow. The joint Human-Zarkon Alliance had become more than just a task force. It was now a council, a gathering of minds from both civilizations, working together to rebuild trust and prevent another tragedy like the Mercy Dawn. For the first time in centuries, humans and Zarkons were sitting at the same tables, speaking the same goals aloud: peace, cooperation, and truth. Back on Earth, the cities were calmer. The fear that once filled the news had been replaced by stories of rebuilding and connection. Trade ships now traveled safely through routes that were once battlegrounds. Scientists from both sides began sharing knowledge. For the first time, the stars didn't seem so divided. The commander of the human fleet often visited the memorial of the Mercy Dawn. It had become a place of quiet reflection, not just for humans but also for Zarkon visitors who came to pay respect. The monument's silver walls shimmered under the artificial sunlight, and the soft hum of energy surrounded it like a heartbeat. Sometimes, the commander stood there alone, watching families leave flowers, lights, or simple handwritten notes. The messages were always the same. Thank you, we remember you changed us. The commander often thought about the journey, how it had started with anger and grief, and how it had ended with unity. He knew that none of it would bring back the people lost on the Mercy Dawn, but maybe in a quiet way it had saved many others. One day, as the commander stood before the memorial, he received a transmission from the new Alliance Council. The message was short: your presence is requested. We are planning a new mission, one that will honor what the Mercy Dawn stood for. Curiosity filled him. Within hours, he boarded a shuttle and traveled to the orbiting council station, where leaders from both sides had gathered. The meeting room was bright and open, with wide windows showing the Earth below, its blue oceans shining under sunlight. As the council began, one of the Zarkon representatives spoke first. We have learned from the pain of our past. The time has come to build something that unites us not only in peace but in purpose. The commander listened carefully as the plan unfolded. The council proposed a new ship, larger than any built before, designed not for war but for healing. It would travel across distant colonies, offering medical aid, supplies, and education to any world in need. Regardless of species or allegiance, they wanted to call it the Mercy Star. The name alone brought silence to the room. Even through the screens, people could feel the emotion of that choice. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a promise that what had been lost would be reborn. The commander nodded slowly. It's the right name, he said. Let her carry the light where the first one fell. The council agreed unanimously. Construction began almost immediately. Across the galaxy, people volunteered to help. Engineers from human colonies, architects from Zarkon cities, miners from neutral worlds. Everyone wanted to be part of something that symbolized hope. Even children sent drawings and messages to be placed inside the ship's walls. The building of the Mercy Star became more than a project. It became a movement. People worked side by side, learning to trust again. The mistakes of the past began to fade, replaced by new stories of friendship and cooperation. When the Mercy Star was finally completed, it was breathtaking. Its hull shimmered with pale silver and gold, designed to reflect light from every nearby star. Inside, it carried advanced medical bays, classrooms, and research centers. It wasn't just a hospital ship. It was a symbol of humanity's growth. At the launch ceremony, both human and Zarkon leaders stood together on a wide platform above Earth's orbit. The commander, now older but still strong, gave the final speech. He said, "Long ago, a ship called Mercy Dawn was destroyed in darkness, but her light never truly went out. It traveled with us through grief, through war, through truth, and now it shines again. This ship, the Mercy Star, will carry that light to the farthest corners of the galaxy. May she never see battle, only healing." As he finished, the ship's engines came alive. They glowed softly, casting a golden hue across the viewing decks. The ship began to move slowly, leaving behind a trail of light, a quiet promise written across the stars. People everywhere watched as the Mercy Star set sail on her first journey. Crowds filled the streets, eyes lifted to the sky. Families hugged each other, knowing that something good had begun. For once, the universe didn't feel so cold. On board, the new crew moved carefully through the halls, touching the smooth walls that carried the engraved names of those who had served on the Mercy Dawn. At the center of the ship, in a small glass chamber, sat an old medallion recovered from the wreck of the original ship. It was engraved with one simple word: humanity. That medallion became the heart of the Mercy Star. Every crew member touched it before their first mission, a small gesture of respect for those who came before them. The Mercy Star's first destination was a distant colony on the edge of the known systems, a planet that had suffered years of drought and illness. The ship's arrival brought clean water, medicine, and supplies. But more than that, it brought hope. The people of that world gathered as the medical teams descended from the ship. They had heard stories about the Mercy Dawn, about how it was lost, and how its memory had united galaxies. Now they saw living proof of what that story had built. When the commander stepped off the ramp, children ran forward with flowers. One of them handed him a small piece of paper with messy handwriting. It said, "Thank you for bringing the stars back." He smiled, folding the paper carefully into his uniform pocket. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for keeping them alive." In the months that followed, the Mercy Star became a legend in her own time. She traveled from world to world, crossing old borders that once divided species. Everywhere she went, she left behind not just medicine, but peace. On some planets, old enemies stood side by side for the first time. On others, children who had only known fear learned to dream again. The ship's crew came from every background: human, Zarkon, and many others, all working together under one name, one mission. As time passed, the story of the Mercy Dawn faded into history books, but her spirit lived on in every act of kindness done aboard the Mercy Star. The alliance grew stronger, no longer out of fear but out of shared purpose. Even the commander, now older and close to retirement, continued to travel with the ship whenever he could. He said the silence of space no longer felt empty. It felt alive, filled with the echoes of all they had learned. One night, as the ship sailed quietly through a region of glowing nebulae, he stood by a window, watching the colors move like soft waves. A young cadet walked up beside him and asked, "Do you think we'll ever be completely free of war?" The commander looked out at the stars for a long time before answering. "Maybe not completely, but every time we choose to heal instead of harm, we take one step closer, and that's what matters." The cadet nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange," she said. "The ship feels alive sometimes, like she's watching over us." The commander smiled. "Maybe she is." He turned back to the stars, and for a brief second he imagined he could see the faint glow of the Mercy Dawn's wreckage far away, still shining quietly among the stars. It was as if the old ship was guiding them, whispering her last message across time and space: never let mercy die. As the Mercy Star continued her journey, the universe seemed just a little brighter. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined the future. Humanity and Zarkon alike had learned something powerful: that compassion was not weakness, and that peace was not born from silence, but from understanding. Years later, when the commander finally retired, he left behind a message for the next generation of explorers. It was short, written in his own hand. "The stars are vast and darkness will always be there. But remember, even one light can change everything. Be that light." The message was placed beside the medallion in the heart of the Mercy Star, where it remains to this day. And as the ship sailed onward into the endless night, her lights shimmered softly, a reminder that from the darkest moment in human history had come something extraordinary. The stars were no longer darkened. They were alive again, carrying the light of mercy shining forever.